what linguistic relativity really looks like, how language shapes attention, memory, and perception across cultures. Does the language you speak influence how you think? Yes, but not in a rigid sense. The influence is more subtle, nuanced, and more profound. This is the core idea of linguistic relativity, the notion that different languages direct their speakers' attention towards different aspects of experience, shaping how people perceive, remember, and interpret the world around them. This is not the same as linguistic determinism, which claims that language limits thought. Nobody today believes that speakers of one language are incapable of understanding concepts expressed in another. But language does have an influence on what speakers habitually notice, how they categorize information, and what distinctions they make. As we saw in the last two videos, early popularizations of this idea, the 50 words for snow myth, oversimplified the concept and hijacked the topic of linguistic relativity. It distracted it from more compelling evidence. There are much richer and more nuanced examples of how language and thought interact. These show that linguistic relativity is real in terms of how grammar, metaphor, and structure guide our mental habits, and not about X language has Y number of words for Z. Thinking with a compass. One of the most striking cases of linguistic relativity comes from how languages describe spatial relationships. In English, we tend to use relative directions like left, right, front, behind. These are egocentric and depend on where the speaker is facing. In other languages, such as the indigenous Australian language Guugu Yimithir, speakers use absolute directions, north, south, east, west, even for small-scale everyday settings. An example of this could be, the notebook is just west of the laptop. To speak and understand in this way, you must constantly be aware of geographic orientation. This translates into real-world cognitive differences. Research shows that speakers of these languages maintain a stronger sense of direction, even in unfamiliar environments. Their language helps them develop and rely on a kind of internal compass. This is a powerful example of how language can shape spatial reasoning and memory. It cultivates default settings for navigating the world. Grammatical gender and perception. In many languages, nouns are assigned grammatical gender. In Spanish, bridge is el puente, i.e. masculine, while in German it's feminine, die Brücke. It is an arbitrary feature, but research suggests that it affects how speakers describe and perceive these objects. For example, in one study, when asked to describe a bridge, Spanish speakers tended to use adjectives like strong, solid, sturdy, i.e. masculine attributes, while German speakers described it as beautiful, elegant, and graceful, feminine features. These associations echo cultural stereotypes tied to gender. This suggests that grammatical structures can subtly shape thought, even subconsciously. This doesn't mean that German speakers think bridges are inherently feminine, but it may influence how they default to thinking or speaking about certain things. Evidentiality, knowing how you know something. In English, we say, she went to the store, and we don't have to clarify how we know this. In other languages like Quechua or Turkish, the speaker is required to indicate the source of the information. How do you know? Did you see her go? Did you hear it from someone else? Did you infer it? This is called evidentiality, and it encodes the speaker's access to knowledge as a required part of the sentence. Over time, speakers of evidential languages develop a heightened sensitivity to source reliability and evidence tracking because their languages constantly demand that they pay attention to this. It illustrates how language can nudge cognition. It causes the speaker to think in a certain way, to the extent that it becomes habitually salient in thought. Blue, electric blue. How we name colours also provides evidence for linguistic relativity. In English, we describe shades by adjectives like light and dark. For example, light blue or dark blue. In Russian, there are two distinct colour terms for blue. Голубой, light blue, and синий, dark blue. It's been decades since I spoke Russian, so forgive me. To a Russian speaker, these are not shades of the same colour, but actually different colours, just like we in English separate red and pink. It's possible that separate linguistic categories can sharpen perceptual discrimination. Of course, English speakers can see the difference, but Russian speakers are more attuned to that difference in a measurable way. This is because the Russian language makes the distinction more central. Time and metaphor, the shape of abstract thought. Time is another domain where language influences thought through metaphor. In English, time is usually conceptualized as a horizontal line. The future is something we look forward to, and the past is something that we leave behind. In Mandarin, speakers also use vertical metaphors, where the past is up and the future is down. In studies where English and Mandarin speakers are asked to arrange a series of photos showing temporal progressions, such as of a person aging, English speakers typically arrange them from left to right. Mandarin speakers are more likely to lay them out vertically. These differences reveal that the metaphors embedded in our language can guide how we organize and mentally structure abstract thoughts, and we do this without conscious awareness. So what does this mean? Language does not restrict thought. No speaker of English is incapable of thinking about cardinal directions or vertical time. But linguistic structures influence mental habits. They shape what people attend to regularly, what they have to encode grammatically, and what becomes cognitively prominent through daily use. However, this doesn't mean that people from different languages live in completely different cognitive worlds. It means that language can nudge cognition. It can emphasize certain features of experience over others. It can guide how people interpret, sort, categorize, and describe what they see. Understanding linguistic relativity is not just an intellectual exercise. It has real-world relevance, particularly in cross-cultural communication, education, psychology, and translation. For example, in clinical outcome assessments or other psychological instruments, it's essential to recognize that emotional states, symptoms, or temporal concepts may not map neatly between languages. A concept like hopelessness or mild discomfort may not exist in the same form across cultures. This is not because the feelings don't exist, but because there's a difference between linguistic frameworks. And another example could be the lack of distinction in many languages between pain and discomfort. To achieve conceptual equivalence, it's not just the vocabulary that we need to understand when translating a core. We also have to understand the cultural and linguistic structures that frame the meaning. Thank you for reading. This was originally written by Mark Gibson, Leeds, United Kingdom, May 2025.